APOLLO-SOYUZ, Peace Above Earth. On July 17, 1975, American astronaut Thomas Stafford and Soviet cosmonaut Aleksei Leonov exchanged their historic space handshake, an event that would have been hard to envision only 6 years earlier. Back then, in July 1969, the space race culminated with the successful American lunar landing, and the global public was waiting for the Soviet Union's response. The Space Business Daily expected the Soviet manned lunar mission to be attempted that October. The rumors about an imminent spectacular Soviet spaceflight seemed to be confirmed in October 1969 with the launch of 3 Soyuz ships. However, after their mission, Western experts agreed that Soviet officials, either by design or circumstance, did not create the space spectacular widely forecasted by many Russian and Western observers. Instead of a further escalation of the space race, what followed within the next few years was no less spectacular, as the 2 rivals led the first cooperative endeavor in manned spaceflight and, in the end, a docking between an American Apollo and a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft. The cooperative efforts during the preparations for the Apollo-Soyuz mission did not reflect a replacement of competitive with cooperative logic. Rather, this served as a good example of an interplay between cooperation and competition. The actors involved in the decision-making for the space program in both countries acknowledged that, in light of the changes that occurred in the late 1960s, it was reasonable to turn to the cooperative mode in order to maintain the competitiveness of the space program. On the global scale, the space competition for prestige was modified by a shift in the norms and expectations of the global audience in its role as the third party. The race for firsts in space inevitably created a zero-sum game and left no room for cooperation. In contrast, the growing importance of down-to-earth considerations, but also the occurrence of new players privileged cooperation. In order for the competitors to be awarded with prestige by the global audience, they had to demonstrate their cooperativeness. Thus, they started to compete at cooperation. The efficiency and cooperativeness of the space program was not just an advantage for the global competition, but also an imperative resulting from the domestic competition with other public sectors and programs. At this point, it becomes clear how closely interwoven the competitive nations were. The shrinking significance of the space race in general forced the political elites to change the list of national priorities, and this led to a repositioning of the space program within the competition for state funds. Consequently, the space managers also had to adapt their strategy in order to maintain the competitiveness of their respective space programs on both the domestic and global scales, despite the budget cuts. Here, the space programs of the United States and the Soviet Union were not only similar in situation, but positively interdependent on each other, since the cuts in funding on one side would challenge high level of space expenditures on the other side. Under the motto, "Either we swim or sink together," it was reasonable for both space programs, compared with other domestic sectors, to strengthen their competitiveness by cooperating and keeping the other in the game.